Glad to see you again. I'm Jackson. In today's episode, I'm going through the last minutes of a snake influencer. From a woman who climbed into her python's enclosure the same night it hadn't eaten in 3 weeks, to a solo documentarian who got too close to a nesting python and was dead on the forest floor before anyone even knew he was in trouble. It was November 14th, 2016. Makassar sits on the southwestern tip of Sulawesi, one of Indonesia's biggest port cities, loud and busy and dense. Ratih's property was on the residential outskirts. Regular house, regular street. You'd never know from the front what she'd built in the back. 3 years of work had gone into that enclosure room, temperature controlled, humidity monitored, set up for animals that needed far more than a tank and a heat lamp. Ratih Setiaji was 29. She started as a beauty blogger, tutorials, skincare, the standard stuff. That changed in 2013 when her younger brother brought home a ball python he picked up at a local market. She filmed herself holding it for the first time, shaking, almost dropping her phone. That video hit 200,000 views overnight, and she never touched beauty content again. By 2016, she had 11 snakes, a full enclosure room, and a following sitting just under 1 million. Her most loved content featured a female reticulated python she had raised from a juvenile. She liked to say the trust they built was the only credential she ever needed. I think most people who watched her would agree. The problem with trust built that way is that it only tells you about yesterday. And I want to be clear, Ratih wasn't reckless in the way people assume when they first hear about her. She understood these animals. What she knew was real, just learned on her own. Which honestly makes me think about how fine that line is between truly knowing something and the confidence that grows from it, and what happens when that confidence gets slightly ahead of it. Reticulated pythons are the longest snake species on Earth. The snake, at the time of this, was roughly 23 feet long and weighed just over 200 pounds. They're not venomous. They don't need to be. They kill through constriction, tightening every single time their prey exhales until the lungs can't physically expand anymore. She hadn't been fed in 3 weeks. That night, Ratih's count hit 1 million. She went live to celebrate. And this is the part that shifts everything for me. Ratih had always filmed from outside the enclosure. Every video, every live session for 3 years straight. That night she stepped inside for the first time on camera. The exit was directly behind her. The python was already alert and moving when the stream started, and Ratih described it as excitement. Looking at what we know about pre-feeding behavior in large constrictors, I don't think that's what it was. The first coil came early into the stream. She narrated it as affection, the snake just wanting warmth. Comments were flooding in, fire emojis, people tagging friends, celebrating the milestone with her. Then the second coil. Her tone shifted. She tried to adjust, tried to keep things light. And then the phone hit the floor, camera pointed at the ceiling. One fluorescent light slightly flickering in frame. The audio ran for 4 more minutes after the phone hit the floor. Movement, shifting weight, then nothing. The stream stayed live and auto-disconnected 47 minutes after the audio stopped. Through most of that window, the people watching assumed it was staged content, a stunt for the milestone. This is what staged danger content does. It makes real danger look like a bit. The assistant showed up the next morning at 9 a.m. for a scheduled shoot, found the back enclosure door slightly open. He had worked alongside that snake long enough to know her patterns, and when he looked into the enclosure, he stopped. The python was in the far corner, almost completely still, midsection carrying a distension that hadn't been there the day before. He didn't go any further. He stepped back outside and called for help from the front of the property. When responders arrived, the distension through the snake's midsection was unmistakable from outside the enclosure. The extraction required a full wildlife team and took several hours. Ratih was found entirely inside the snake, consumed head first. Official cause of death was constriction leading to asphyxiation, followed by post-mortem ingestion. She was almost certainly gone before the consuming began. Almost certainly. Her phone was recovered on the enclosure floor, live stream app still open. The 4 minutes of audio it captured became the primary timeline evidence in the case file. No criminal charges were filed. The python was taken by wildlife authorities. The case file makes no mention of her after that point. Ratih's case is one of those where The more you look at it, the harder it is to find a moment where a different choice would have saved her. Next, I want to take you to Limpopo, South Africa. A game tracker who had already flagged the exact section of trail where it happened weeks before it did, and still didn't make it past the 20 minutes that followed. It was March 3rd, 2015. Limpopo is the northernmost province in South Africa. Flat, dry thorn bush country where the heat starts building before 9 in the morning. Low vegetation, cracked ground, open in every direction. You'd look at it and think there's nowhere for anything to hide. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. Bertus Ninaber was 34. He was in his first season working as a game tracker on a private wildlife property. Still learning the land, still getting the roots into his muscle memory, still building the kind of instincts that take years to develop. He came in wanting to do the job right. That much is clear from everything that followed. What makes this one sit differently is that he wasn't someone who ignored the environment or took shortcuts. He was paying attention, probably more than most people would in their first season. He just hadn't been there long enough to fully understand what he was looking at yet. He was doing a pre-tour sweep of the trail before a group of 6 guests arrived at 10 a.m. Walk the route, check the markers, flag anything worth a second look. He had been shown how to run it in his first week. His radio was on him. Anti-venom was kept refrigerated back at the main base, which is standard across properties like this. Nobody carried it into the field. And that morning, nothing about the routine suggested anything would be different. Black mambas are the fastest land snakes in the world, hitting up to 12 miles per hour. They grow to around 14 feet. Their venom is primarily neurotoxic. It shuts the nervous system down progressively, and without antivenom, respiratory failure can kick in within 20 minutes of a full bite. One strike carries enough venom to kill several adults. And here's the thing people always get wrong about mambas. They don't chase. They're not out looking for a fight. But startle one, corner one, move too close without realizing it, and it strikes fast and more than once. There's no warning behavior. No bluff charge. It just goes. The trail Bertus was walking ran along a dry creek bed on the eastern side of the property. Weeks before that morning, he had actually flagged that same stretch because he kept finding signs of an active mamba using that corridor. He brought it to management properly, even as a new employee, asked them to either adjust the route or put something specific in place for that section. The morning of the 3rd, the temperature was already 84 degrees Fahrenheit before 9 a.m. Snakes were out early and moving. Bertus was about 800 yards from the main base, roughly a 12-minute walk, when he stepped off the trail to check a marker flag positioned near the creek bed embankment. The grass along the bank was low and dry, exactly the kind of spot a mamba uses to thermoregulate in the early morning heat. The mamba struck twice in rapid succession, right forearm and the back of the right hand. He grabbed his radio immediately and got a transmission out. Not long after the strike, his speech was already slurring badly enough that his colleague at base could hear it clearly, and that colleague didn't wait. He moved toward Bertus right away. He found him face down on the trail, not breathing, radio still in his right hand, the transmission line still open. 2 puncture marks on the forearm and hand. Estimated time from the first strike to full unresponsiveness, somewhere around 8 to 10 minutes. His colleague got back on the radio the second he found him. A response team got to him by vehicle within 12 minutes carrying antivenom. They worked on him immediately. No response to treatment. Bertus was declared dead at the scene. Total time from the first strike to death, 18 to 22 minutes. The partial transmission Bertus got out was pulled from the base logs and gave investigators the clearest picture of how fast everything went wrong. You could hear him deteriorating in real time on that recording. Venom analysis confirmed black mamba neurotoxin. Cause of death was respiratory failure from diaphragm paralysis. The venom had already stopped him from being able to breathe before anyone reached him. Both bite sites were consistent with a close-range defensive strike. He had gotten too close to it without seeing it, and it reacted the way a cornered mamba always does. A formal review went through everything after: response time, antivenom protocol, distance from base, terrain. No individual negligence was found. A full black mamba bite moves faster than any response team can cover 800 yards. That's not a justification. That's just what the venom does. The trail flag Bertus had put in weeks earlier was noted in the review. It's in the record. The trail was shut down for the rest of the season. The 6 guests who showed up at 10 a.m. were told it wasn't running. That was all they got. The math of this one is brutal, and no amount of going back over it changes anything. Western Amazon, 2013. Reynaldo moved ahead of his group without waiting, and whatever had been sitting in that root system was already there long before he showed up. It was June 19th, 2013. The Western Amazon, a flooded tributary running off the Solimões River, one of the biggest river systems in the Amazon basin. This part of the waterway doesn't show up on any commercial map. June is low water season. The banks go soft. The receding flood exposes root systems and forest floor that spent months underwater, and the undergrowth gets complicated in ways that aren't obvious until you're already in it. Reynaldo Farias was 41, field researcher, environmental documentation, river system ecology. He had real experience, but always in a structured setting with people who knew the terrain. That kind of knowledge doesn't transfer the way people think it does. He was part of a 3-person team that morning with a local guide who knew the waterways. At some point, he stopped following the plan and started following his curiosity. When the guide stopped the boat, Reynaldo moved ahead on his own into a section of flooded undergrowth before anyone told him to. He wanted a closer look at something in the vegetation. That much was clear from where he ended up. The guide hadn't cleared that section. Reynaldo didn't wait. Bushmasters are the longest venomous snake in the Western Hemisphere. Big adults hit 10 to 12 feet and can push past 10 pounds. They're pit vipers. They sense heat, stay low, and hunt entirely through patience and camouflage. They don't go looking for prey. They find a spot and sit in it, sometimes for days, until something walks close enough. The venom breaks down tissue, stops the blood from clotting, and causes internal bleeding that spreads out from the bite. Without antivenom in a remote setting, a full bite is almost always a death sentence. Fatality rate without treatment sits between 80 and 100%. Low water season leaves behind exactly the kind of terrain a bushmaster uses: exposed root systems, soft ground, dense undergrowth. They don't need water to be there. They just need cover and something to wait for. The section Reynaldo moved into had vegetation closing in overhead and root systems crossing through the water in every direction. Ankle to knee deep, soft ground shifting underfoot. Water too murky to see what was on the floor beneath it. Your eyes go to what's in front of you. The path, the plants, whatever caught your attention in the first place, not to the ground around your feet. He was there to observe, so was the bushmaster. The researchers waited at the boat. They could hear him moving through the undergrowth, the sounds of someone pushing through root systems and shallow water. Then they heard something different. It was a short, sharp sound, fast and heavy somewhere in the vegetation. Then it went quiet. They called out and got nothing back. The bushmaster had almost certainly been sitting in that root system before Reynaldo reached it. He stepped too close, possibly directly onto it, possibly just inside the strike range it had been holding for hours. First contact was a strike to the lower left leg. Long fangs, deep penetration, full envenomation in a single bite. He had no radio. The pain is immediate and severe, and the venom starts working on tissue and clotting factors within minutes. In that terrain, with no one close enough and no way to call for help, there was no realistic path out from the moment it landed. They waited about 20 minutes, calling out and listening. When nothing came back, they went in. They found him face down in the water 43 feet from the boat. The bushmaster was gone. One researcher got on the radio while the others stayed with Reynaldo. A river response team reached them roughly 90 minutes later. 90 minutes was fast for out there. No antivenom was on the boat. It wouldn't have been standard kit for a documentation trip on that route. The post-mortem found 2 deep puncture wounds to the lower left leg, consistent with a large pit viper. Cause of death was hemorrhagic shock from hemotoxic envenomation. The clotting system had failed completely, and internal bleeding had spread well beyond the bite site. 90 minutes without antivenom and a full envenomation from a snake that size, the outcome was set long before anyone reached him. His GPS logged his last position at 43 feet from the boat, time-stamped 11:22 a.m. His radio was back on the boat. He hadn't needed it for a check that short. The researcher accounts matched the physical evidence. His team filed their reports and suspended the remainder of the trip. That section of the tributary hasn't been on any active survey route since. Some environments just don't have room for the kind of curiosity that skips the part where you wait. This next one is different. Dubem Ogbu knew exactly what had bitten him and spent 3 days making sure nobody in his house found out. It was August 8th, 2017, southeastern Nigeria, a rural farming settlement where the nearest town is a long drive down a rough road, and most people are completely used to handling problems on their own. Medical help is far out, resources are limited, and going outside the community for anything is usually the last thing anyone does, not the first. That's not a criticism, it's just how life runs in places like this. For Dubem Ogbu, handling things quietly and locally had worked his entire life. Dubem was 38. Subsistence farming, cassava and yams, the same land his family had worked across 3 generations. He ran it daily alongside his younger brother. Around the settlement, he was known as capable and self-reliant. The kind of person who sorted things out without making noise about it. His wife and 2 children lived on the property with him. That morning, he was bitten while clearing brush at the edge of the field and told nobody. That kind of self-reliance works right up until the problem is bigger than the person carrying it alone. Gaboon vipers are the largest vipers in Africa, with the longest fangs of any venomous snake on Earth, up to 2 inches, and the highest venom yield per bite of any snake species. The venom is cytotoxic, meaning it destroys tissue at a cellular level and spreads outward from the bite site. Left untreated, it causes severe swelling, deep tissue destruction, internal bleeding, and eventually septic shock. They move slowly and blend almost perfectly into the ground around them. Bites happen because someone steps on one or gets too close in thick grass without seeing it. You don't find a Gaboon viper, you stumble into one. That's exactly what Dubem did. The pain was immediate and intense. He wrapped the ankle, told his family he twisted it, working, and just kept going like nothing had happened. By the following morning, the swelling had pushed up to mid-calf, and the skin was starting to discolor badly. He was visibly limping and told his brother the ankle had gotten worse from the twist. He shot down any suggestion of outside help and said it would pass. He was eating poorly and sleeping badly, and his wife noticed his breathing had changed. Underneath the skin, the tissue destruction was already well advanced. By the 3rd morning, he couldn't stand without support. The skin on his lower leg had gone black in patches, and the damage had moved past the knee. His temperature was spiking. His wife was helping him change his clothing when she found the wound. 2 clean puncture marks in the middle of blackened, liquefied tissue. The secret had been eating him from the inside the whole time. Like, literally. She didn't wait. She got him out of that house and moved toward help before he had a chance to argue about it. He was taken by road to the nearest medical facility about 40 miles out. He was already unresponsive when they got there. Staff noted the infection had spread through his whole system. The tissue damage across his lower leg was severe, and his body was shutting down. No antivenom was available at that location. A transfer was arranged, but Dubem died in transit before they got there. He died on the afternoon of August 10th, roughly 72 hours after the bite. The puncture wounds and surrounding tissue damage were consistent with Gaboon viper fangs, with the tissue throughout the wound site broken down and destroyed outward from where the fangs went in. Cause of death was recorded as the body going into septic shock from the venom, with the delay in treatment listed as the main reason it got that far, which means the 3 days were more dangerous than the fangs. His wife's account gave investigators the full picture of how those 3 days actually went, what Dubem said, what he didn't, and when each symptom appeared. 3 days after the incident, a local handler found and removed a Gaboon viper from the same section of brush at the field edge, confirming the species. The case was recorded as accidental death. No formal inquiry was opened. His brother continued working the land after that. Dubem had 72 hours and used none of them. Kelvin Hawker didn't get anywhere near that. He walked his fence line one morning in rural New South Wales just weeks after buying the property, and his wife found him sitting against a post before breakfast was even cold. It was February 22nd, 2016. Rural New South Wales, flat paddock country with long grass running thick along the fence lines and scattered gum trees breaking up the horizon. February is the middle of summer out here, and temperatures push well past 100 degrees Fahrenheit most days. The heat pulls snakes out early and keeps them moving through the morning hours. Anyone who has spent enough time on rural land in New South Wales knows that going in. Kelvin Hawker was 52. He had bought the property about 8 months earlier. Grain and some cattle, a lifestyle shift he had been working toward for a while. He hadn't grown up on rural land. He picked up the actual farm work reasonably quickly, but the environment around the property was still unfamiliar to him in the ways that mattered. He knew there were snakes around. He had spotted a few since moving in and gave them space the way most people would, but he hadn't been there long enough to know which species, where they typically stayed, or what conditions brought them out. There's nothing dramatic about how Kelvin ended up in that paddock that morning, just a routine he'd been building for 8 months on land that was still teaching him things. That morning he went out to walk the eastern fence line and check for damage after a storm the previous night. He left around 7:30 a.m. He didn't take his phone. Eastern brown snakes are responsible for more human deaths in Australia than any other species, which surprises most people because they're not even the most venomous snake in the country. They're slender, fast, and come in shades of brown that blend almost perfectly into dry or flattened grass. When startled at close range, Eastern browns may bypass any defensive display entirely. The strike comes before there's distance or time for either party to register what's happening. The bite marks they leave are tiny, often barely visible, and the initial pain is minimal enough that people have walked away from bites without fully registering what just happened to them. The storm the night before had flattened long sections of grass along the eastern fence line, the same cover snakes shelter under. By 7:30 a.m., the temperature was already climbing past 79 degrees Fahrenheit. Snakes were out sitting in the open, where the flattened grass gave them direct sun. The eastern fence ran through a section that had been left to grow all season, exactly the kind of spot an eastern brown settles into on a warm morning after a storm. Kelvin had no phone, no radio, and nobody with him. His wife expected him back for breakfast around 9 a.m. That was just their routine. He was working along the fence line when he disturbed an eastern brown resting in the flattened grass at the base of the wire. 2 strikes to the lower right leg in rapid succession, through the fabric of his work pants. The snake was gone into the grass before he could react properly. Eastern brown strikes are fast and quiet, and the marks they leave are the kind of thing that's easy to underestimate in the first few minutes. The physical evidence at the scene suggests he sat down against the fence post not long after. He didn't try to walk back toward the house. Whether that was a deliberate decision or whether the venom made that call before he could is something nobody was able to determine. His wife went out to find him at 9:15 a.m. when he didn't come in. She found him sitting upright against the post, completely unresponsive. She got on the radio in the farm vehicle right away. A response crew arrived roughly 35 minutes later. He was pronounced dead at the scene. There was nothing visibly wrong with Kelvin when his wife reached him. From a distance, he looked like someone who had sat down to take a break. The 2 small puncture marks on his lower right leg only turned up during the post-mortem, barely distinguishable from surface marks left by dry grass and fence wire. Venom testing confirmed eastern brown snake envenomation. Cause of death was cardiac arrest from vascular collapse and coagulopathic envenomation. The venom triggers a clotting cascade that burns through the body's clotting factors, and combined with the direct cardiovascular effects, the body moves toward cardiac failure fast. Time of death was placed between 7:45 and 8:15 a.m. based on body temperature and venom progression. He had been dead for over an hour before his wife went looking for him. Shed skin was recovered from the flattened grass near the fence post during a later site check. A wildlife handler came out the following week and removed a large eastern brown from that same section of fence. The post-mortem found more than the scene did, and I think that says everything about how quietly this one happened. A local tip about a python nest in Palawan's lowland jungle pulled a first-time solo documentarian in alone in 2014, and his contact had no idea a nesting female was already on those eggs when he got there. It was September 4th, 2014. Palawan is a long, narrow island on the western edge of the Philippines, well known for its coastline, but the interior lowland jungle is a completely different environment. Dense canopy, thick undergrowth, terrain that swallows sound and light within a few feet of the tree line. By September, the forest floor is humid and layered with dead vegetation from months of rainy season. You move slowly in there, whether you want to or not. Cipriano Lacdan was 44. He had spent several years doing assistant work on small wildlife documentary productions, carrying gear, scouting locations, handling logistics while someone else made the calls. He knew how those shoots ran and had been around enough fieldwork to feel comfortable in it. This trip to Palawan was his first time running something on his own, just him and a camera and a local contact who had been feeding him location tips for months. The most recent tip was about repeated sightings of a large Burmese python in the lowland forest, with what looked like a nest site about a quarter mile off the main trail. Every shoot he had assisted on before would have sent a full team in for something like that. Cipriano went in alone because the sighting hadn't been confirmed yet, and I get it, especially on a first solo shoot, where you're still trying to prove you can run something on your own. Burmese pythons are one of the largest snake species on Earth. Females regularly push past 18 feet and 200 pounds, and the ones guarding a nest tend to sit at the larger end of that range. They're not venomous, and they kill entirely through constriction. Nesting females coil around their eggs and stay there for the full incubation period, anywhere from 60 to 80 days, without eating the entire time. During that period, they actually generate their own body heat through muscle contractions to keep the eggs warm, which keeps them in a constant state of physical activity and alertness. Anything that gets too close gets a response with no warning before it happens. Cipriano located the nest about 20 minutes into the forest, a raised mound of dry vegetation on the jungle floor, partially tucked under low undergrowth. The python was already coiled on the eggs when he got there. He hung back first, got a few angles from a distance, then started moving in closer. He was moving slowly with his camera up, the way you would around any animal you don't want to set off. The problem with a nesting python is that slow and careful gets you to the same place as rushing in. He got too close, and she came off the nest immediately. She came off the nest and bit first. Multiple strikes to the upper arms and torso, the way a defensive animal anchors before it does anything else. The weight of a snake that size moving at speed took him straight to the ground. She rapped briefly and he couldn't move against it. His camera was found 6 feet from the nest with the lens cap still on. He never got a single frame off. The thing about proving you can run something on your own is that there's no one there when it goes wrong. His contact waited well past the agreed return time before walking to the forest edge and calling out. Nothing came back. It was already getting dark, and going in alone wasn't safe. He spent the night at the nearest settlement and came back at first light with 3 men. They found Cipriano's bag near the trail entry point. He was located about 80 feet into the forest, face down near the nest site. The python was back on the eggs. The post-mortem documented multiple bite wounds to the upper arms and torso, consistent with a large constrictor. Rib fractures and heavy bruising across the chest were present, along with blunt head trauma consistent with a hard fall onto root systems or jungle floor. Cause of death was recorded as blunt head trauma, with constriction injury and asphyxia listed as contributing factors. The snake was doing what nesting animals do. Cipriano was doing what first-time solo operators do. Those two things just happened to meet. His camera was recovered 6 feet from the nest with the lens cap still on. His GPS logged his last position at 80 feet from the trail entry at 10:54 a.m. His contact's account filled in the rest of the timeline. The case was closed as accidental death. A wildlife team confirmed an active Burmese python nest at that location in the weeks following and documented it from the trail. They didn't go past the tree line.